If you would be opening up your Bibles to the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 37, I think, is where we'll begin in just a moment. As you're turning to that particular passage, I just wanted to say a couple of things. One, I would suggest to each one of you to move to the very front at the beginning of our services, because you would not believe how well the sound that we had this morning and this evening of our singing. It was powerful. And I appreciate so much the energy in which our song leaders led us this morning and this evening. And I'm suggesting that you move forward knowing that you can't, because we have everybody full from here and there, so I get to enjoy the benefit of being up front. But it's an amazing thing to hear saints coming together to raise their voices in praise to God. And this evening, our young brother who led the singing, led a song that will forever be associated with his dad. And you get choked up over little things. But I can just, right there in that part of the, I've been with him too long not to watch him do it. So, but it's a wonderful thing to sing and to see that passing down from one generation to the next. The other, if I can make it to it, that I was going to mention before we got to the lesson is I had very seriously thought about asking Chris to preach the same lesson again. He did a wonderful job this morning, and it's a lesson that we all need. So if you were not able to be here this morning, I highly encourage you to go and to look at that on our YouTube channel and listen to it. And if you were here this morning, I encourage you to go and listen to it again, because it is a lesson that we all need, one of endurance, one of patience, one of continuing on, because we all need that. In Jeremiah chapter 37, Jeremiah, the prophet, it's very close now to the time in which the city of Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. And God has told the people of Jerusalem and the people of Judea that they need to submit to the Chaldeans, that they need to not resist any longer, that He will have some mercy on them and some kindness to them if they will just simply submit to the Chaldeans, submit to the Babylonians, go out to them and do what they say, and He will not completely annihilate. But don't resist. And despite having seen all the things that God had already told them and all the things that God had said was going to happen, that they happened, they continued to resist. They continued to ignore. They continued to reject the words of God. And here in Jeremiah chapter 37, it's interesting that the King Zedekiah here, comes to Jeremiah again, and he wants Jeremiah to go back to God again and to pray to God again for direction and for help and find out if there's something else that the Lord is going to tell them. And Jeremiah goes back to God, and Jeremiah is given the answer that despite the fact that the Chaldeans have kind of turned away for a short amount of time because the Egyptians have come up and they're going to have to focus their attention on the Egyptians for a little bit. He says, but don't take any comfort in that, because just a little bit, they're going to turn around, they're going to come back to the city of Jerusalem, and they're going to take you down. You're going to be destroyed if you don't listen to me. But they don't listen. But Jeremiah is not in prison at this particular moment, and he is actually going to be leaving the city of Jerusalem, and he's going out to the tribe, the area of Benjamin, where his particular land is. And on his way out, he is accused. He's accused of being someone who's going to flee to the Chaldeans. He's going to be a traitor. He's going to turn away from them. And so they take him and they put him in a dungeon. They put him in prison. And he's enduring hard conditions. And again, at the end of chapter 37, they bring him out. And the king again says, is there any word from the Lord? Has He changed His mind? That's kind of what it feels like he's always asking. Has He changed His mind? Can we do something else? And Jeremiah again says, no, nothing's changed, but don't send me back to the dungeon lest I die there. And so he gives him a little bit of respite again from the dungeon there, and he keeps him kind of in captivity associated with it, but he's not in the dungeon. But as we move into chapter 38, though, some men come and they know the message that Jeremiah has been giving them, that they needed to submit to the Chaldeans, otherwise they're going to die. And they say, this Jeremiah character, He's taking all the wind out of our sails. He's making the people depressed. We need to take him. We need to get rid of him, king. And so the king says, he's in your power. Do what you want to with him. And so they take Jeremiah and they throw him into a cistern. But the cistern, which is supposed to be a well of water, there's no water in it. It's only mud. And they throw him down into the cistern, and it says that he sinks into the mud. Now, I don't know how far up he sunk in the mud. It doesn't really say. But I can imagine being trapped in mud. And I can imagine that being a very, very irritating condition. That you can't move. You're stuck, literally stuck. And you can't go anywhere. And this is where he's at for some period of time. And yet there comes some man, a man, who has faith in God. And he goes to the king. This man's name is Ebed-Melech. There in Jeremiah chapter 38 and verse 7. And he says, King, we need to get him out of there. He's going to die. And the king allows him to take some men, and he goes and he puts down some ropes, and he puts down some cloths to go up underneath his arms when they pull him out. And they pull him up out of the cistern. They put him up out of the mud. And as they get him out of the mud, King Zedekiah comes again and says, Jeremiah, what about God's commands for us? And Jeremiah again counsels the king. And he tells him, if I tell you, you're just going to put me to death. And he says, no, I won't put you to death. I promise I won't do that. He says, well, the answer is, if you want to spare your life, if you want to spare the city, submit. Submit to the Chaldeans. Otherwise, there's no hope. So the message hadn't changed. So as we get to chapter 39, we have for us there an indication that for 18 months, the city of Jerusalem has been under siege. 18 months. That's a long time to be under siege, and the kind of conditions that are going on in the city of Jerusalem are beyond our comprehension. But there's a breach in the wall after 18 months, and they see the end is here. And so what happens is King Zedekiah says, it's time for me to get out of Dodge if I can. And so he tries to run. He tries to escape. He tries to flee. But they catch King Zedekiah as he's going around about the area of Jericho. And they take Zedekiah, they take him to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar punishes Zedekiah for his resistance, a punishment that we would have a very difficult time of accepting. They kill his sons before him in his vision as he watches them, along with some of his nobles. Then they put his eyes out, and they carry him captive back to Babylon. So now, what happens is Nebuchadnezzar determines to put in someone as governor over the people. And one of his own servants he uses to kind of help set all this up. I practiced his name, and I will not get it right. Nebuzaradan, something close to that. And they select a man by the name of Gedaliah. Now, in doing this, they also decide to free Jeremiah. And they give him a choice. They say, Jeremiah, you can go back with us to the area of Babylon, or if you choose, you can stay here. Whatever you'd like to do. So Jeremiah determines that he's going to stay in the land of Judah, and he's going to stay in Mizpah, which is the city where the governor is. The governor now has been selected, and that is Gedaliah. The governor has been selected or appointed by King Nebuchadnezzar. So Gedaliah then, now in the city of Mizpah, has some people, some commanders, forces out in the open country who have been kind of resisting the Chaldeans. They come now that they know that Gedaliah has been appointed as governor. They come to him and they kind of ask him, okay, what do we need to do? And it's, again, interesting that he tells them exactly what Jeremiah has been telling them. He says, submit yourself to the rule of the Chaldeans and all will be well for you. He's not going to take any more of you captive. If you'll just submit to him, you can stay in the land and things will go well. And they kind of hear him because in that first year it says there that they gathered up. Let me get to the right place here. In Jeremiah chapter 40, in verse 12, and they gathered wine and summer fruits in great abundance. But Things were going on behind the scenes. Some people still weren't real pleased. One specific person was Ishmael. Ishmael was from a royal lineage, and he had some connections there with the king of Ammon, and he had thoughts of assassinating Gedaliah. Well, Gedaliah was told this, but he just thought, no, that can't be right. That can't be true. But as we open up chapter 41, we see that it is true. Because what happens is that Ishmael comes and he assassinates not only Gedaliah, but also some other people that were with him, some Judeans that were with him, and also, which is important here, and also some people who were the soldiers of the Chaldeans. He kills them all. And then the next day, you have 80 men that come up from Shechem and Shiloh and somewhere else. I've forgotten now where the other place was. But one other place, they come up and they were going to offer up sacrifices, and he kills them. And he puts all the slain in another cistern. They must have had a lot of cisterns. And they put him in there. And basically, he is revolting against the Chaldean authority. Now, the rest of the people, including a man by the name of Johanan, well, they're upset because they realize that when the King Nebuchadnezzar, hears about this, he's going to come down hard on us. He's going to come down hard on us, and it's going to be bad for all of us. So what they decide to do is they decide to gather up their belongings, and they're going to head down to Egypt. They're going to get out of this mess. They're going to get away from all this. They're going to go down there. They don't have to worry about war anymore and all that. They're just going to leave. But before they go down, chapter 42, we're covering a lot of ground quickly. Chapter 42, they come to Jeremiah one more time. And they say, Jeremiah, we want you to go up to the Lord for us. We want you to pray to the Lord for us. And Jeremiah tells them in Jeremiah chapter 42 and verse 4, I have heard you. Behold, I will pray to the Lord your God according to your request. And whatever the Lord answers you, I will tell you. I will keep nothing back from you. He says, I'll go and pray. And I'll come back and I'll tell you everything that he tells me. And notice the response of the people. Verse 5, may the Lord be a true and faithful witness against us if we do not act according to all the word with which the Lord your God sends you to us. Whether it is good or bad, we will obey the voice of the Lord our God to whom we are sending you, that it may be well with us when we obey the voice of the Lord our God. We will do whatever he says. You go find out, and we'll do it. And so in Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 7, it says, at the end of 10 days, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Now, if you haven't figured out by now, God's word didn't change. His word was still the same. Submit yourselves to them. If you'll submit yourselves to them, then things will be well with you. But if you decide to go down to Egypt, God knew what they had planned on doing. If you decide to go down to Egypt, I want you to know that not only will the sword find you down there, the one that you're afraid of, death that you're afraid of, it's going to find you in Egypt. The famine that you're afraid of, they have been experiencing famine there, a lack of food in the area of Jerusalem now for 2 years. All this stuff that you're afraid of, the things that you're trying to run from, it's going to find you there. So what you need to do is hear my word, and you need to submit yourselves to the Chaldeans. And that was God's word to them. And remember what they said. They said, whatever he says, whether it's good or bad, we're going to do it. So you know what they did? They called him a liar and went to Egypt. That's what they did. They said, no, you're tricking us. Now, we're going to go to Egypt. Now, just as a side note, 5 years after the fall of Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar went down and invaded Egypt and took all those people that were Jews captive. A number of years after that, in 568, he invaded it again. So if they missed it the first time, they got it the second time. Exactly what God said would happen, happened. Now, that's a long introduction. And you might be trying to figure out, as I typically do, what's the lesson on, except for most of the time I've already asked Chris, and I know what the lesson is going to be on his. But you might be saying, okay, what's his lesson going to be on? What's his point? And you might think, well, obviously, since he said it like 16 times in 3 or 4 chapters there, that if you'll just listen to God and do what He says, that's what you should do. He told them over and over and over again, submit to them and things will be well with you. But if you don't, it won't be well with you. And you know what they kept doing? Rejecting it, not listening to it, saying that can't be right. So that's obviously the lesson. No, it's not. That's not the lesson. It's a good lesson, but it's not the lesson for tonight. The lesson for tonight is a verse that I read very quickly and just kind of went right on by. And I did that on purpose. Jeremiah 42 and verse 7. At the end of 10 days, hang on. At the end of 10 days, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Jeremiah went to God and prayed to God. And my guess is he didn't just pray the one time. Now, I don't know that for a positive fact, but knowing the kind of person that Jeremiah was, I don't think he just prayed one time and he was done. But that he kept going back to God because God didn't answer him the first day. Could God have answered him the first day? Well, yeah. He could have. He didn't answer him the first day, nor the second, nor the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth. On the 10th day, the Lord answered him. Why is it that God waited 10 days to give Jeremiah the answer? I don't know the real reasons why, because they're not given to me. But I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions as to why God may wait before He gives us our answers. You see, we need to be patient, persevering in our prayers, because God doesn't always answer right away. What will patient prayer do for us? Why do we need to be patient when we ask God, when we talk to God? Well, number one, we need to be patient in our prayer life because it develops renewed strength. It develops trust. It develops spiritual discipline. A passage that you heard this morning from the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 40. Here in Isaiah chapter 40, you can almost read into it that the people have almost thought that God has forgotten them, that God doesn't know what's going on with them any longer. And yet God, through Isaiah, and this is really looking forward to a time in which they're going into captivity, God is telling them through Isaiah that He hasn't forgotten. He does remember. That God is not like men. So in Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 26, He says, when you think in that way, lift up your eyes on high and see who created these. He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of His might, and because He is strong in power, not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? He's forgotten us. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might He increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength, and they shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Did you notice the ones that He says that He was going to bless them? Those who wait for the Lord. Is that not what Jeremiah was doing? He was waiting for the Lord. You know, when we reach points in our lives when we don't think we understand what's going on, when we feel like everything is falling apart, when we feel like all of our plans have gone astray, when we feel like somebody punched us in the mouth, for those of you who were here this morning, when we feel like we've been punched in the mouth, we need to wait patiently, and we need to pray. We need to wait on the Lord. Our God is all-knowing. Our God is all-powerful. He does know. He does care. He has not forgotten us. Our charge, our duty, is to patiently wait through prayer. You know, waiting helps us to become stronger in the Lord. Notice to be stronger in the Lord. We become more dependent upon Him. We become more dependent on His strength and not on our own wisdom, our own power, our own might. Spiritual discipline. You know, we discipline our bodies in a lot of different ways, don't we? We do it physically, right? We'll discipline our body either through bike riding or through running or through diet or whatever things that we do. You can do yoga, whatever it is that you do, right? You can discipline your body. You can train your body to do things. Spiritual discipline is sometimes a little more difficult. But there are ways to do it. We can do it through Bible study, obviously. But one way to do it is to wait and persevere and be patient in prayer. It helps us to grow. When God waits to answer our prayers, it may simply be that He's given me time to grow. And one man said, time spent waiting on the Lord is never wasted. You know, sometimes we think about waiting as wasted time. You have to wait in line to see the doctor, which we all have to wait in line to see the doctor. We feel like, boy, this is a bunch of wasted time. I could be doing this, I could be doing that, or, you know, if you're waiting in line anywhere, man, I could be doing so much. Time spent waiting on the Lord is never wasted. Isaiah talks about waiting on the Lord multiple times in his. Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 17, 30 and verse 18, 49 and verse 23, and others. And there's blessings associated that are talked about in each one of those verses. But we don't have time to get to them. Patient prayer develops renewed strength and spiritual discipline. But patient prayer also, and this is one we've got to really pay attention to. Patient prayer, being persistent in our prayer, sometimes it gives us the time to accept a different answer from God. You know, like everything else in our society, we want our prayers to be answered right now. Right? We want it done right now. We want it to be like Daniel. You remember in Daniel chapter 9, it's one of the most impressive things. Well, there's a lot of impressive things in Daniel. But one of the things in Daniel chapter 9 that hits me every time I read that particular one is that Daniel goes to God on behalf of his sins and his confessions for him, but also for the confessions of the people. And as he is still talking, chapter 9, verses 20 through 23, Gabriel comes, and Gabriel tells him, when you started your prayer, I was sent out. That's what we want, right? Just as soon as I say, our Father, boom, send somebody. That's what we want. We want the genie of the lamp, right? He's right there. I can pull him out. Boom. Immediate. But you know what else part of that genie of the lamp that we want? We not only want him to be right here, right now, we want him to give us whatever we ask for. Including ultimate cosmic power, for those of you who are Disney fans. But God's answers and God's plans, sometimes they're delayed in coming to us. And it could be that God is delaying His answer to us because He wants me to think more on it. It could be that He's saying, you sure that's going to fit my will into your life? You know, it's often true that the vision that I have for my life, and maybe the vision you have for your life, is too narrow in scope because we can't see the whole picture. But there's someone who can. The passage that was read for us this evening when we started, Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 11. Do you remember what he said? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Now, I don't personally believe that God has designed out every step in my life, because God gives me free will and free choice. But I wholeheartedly believe that if I'll do God's will, God has a plan for me to do what's right and to do what's good and to do something that will help others. You see, I know that it is always true, always, every situation, no exceptions. I don't give you these too often. There is no exception to this rule. God always wants you to do right. No exception. Whatever the consequences, no exceptions, do right. Do His will. Because you see, you can't do the will of God for your life if you're not doing the will of God in your life. It's not possible. So He always wants you to do right. That much I know. But that doesn't mean you're not going to hit roads that have hills and valleys and twists and turns and curves that you never planned. But God knows. And in those cases, listen, in those cases, God is a better navigator. Not me. God is a better navigator. So what we need to do is wait. That doesn't mean we don't do anything. We're doing His will. We're working, but we're waiting. Do you remember the second missionary journey of Paul? When he took Silas with him to go back to strengthen the other congregations that he had been on his first missionary journey? Do you remember that how he had passed through Lystra and Derbe and he wanted to take a right-hand turn and go back east into Asia Minor? You know what God said? No. You can imagine Paul thinking, what do you mean no? They need the gospel over there. There's people over there that need it. No. Okay. So he went on. He went on through areas of Phrygia and Galatia, and he came to Mysia, and he says, you know, now I think I'll go to Bithynia, which is turning back again east, going to the northwest part of Asia Minor. I'll turn back and go. You know what God said? No. Now, was his intentions not noble? Were his actions not good? Yes, but God said, no, that's not the right time. That's not where I need you to be. But he didn't know that, other than God said no. Now later, not much later, but later, he sees a vision and he needs to go to Macedonia. And that's where he goes. And we think of all the good that he did in Philippi and Corinth and Athens and other places. But it's because God knew. And Paul just had to wait. He kept working, but he was waiting. Have you ever considered that sometimes the things that we really desire, the things that we think would be just the best for us in our life, even in our service to God, is just what's not best? Or maybe we thought that we're asking for the right thing, and maybe we did ask for the right thing, but God is saying, but not yet. Not yet. It's not the right time yet. You know, Abraham and Sarah wanted a son. And my guess is they didn't want a son when they became 75 years old, when Abraham became 75, when he was given the promise. My guess is, it's a guess, my guess is he wanted a son before then. And I also probably pretty confident that he and Sarah asked God for one before then. But God said it's not the right time. When Abraham became 90 years old, they decided we'll take it into our own hands. We'll give Hagar to him. And we'll have a son. And they did. But God said, no, that's not my plan. When he was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, God said, yep, it's time. One man said they could have had the child when Sarah was 19, but it wouldn't bring the glory that it did when she had him at 90. Because it was according to God's plan. Patient prayer is important because sometimes it shows us that God's way is radically different than our way. And folks, we must be willing to submit to His will, no matter what it takes. You see, if we always get what we want, then we're not really walking by faith. We're walking by what we want. But Paul says we need to walk by faith. 2 suggestions very quickly for patient prayer. Number 1, focus on God and not the request. You know, the purpose of prayer is not to convince God that we need what we ask for. Matthew 6 and verse 8 tells us He already knows that. So we don't need to try to convince Him. We don't need to have some kind of elaborate reasoning of why I need it, some meticulous description of exactly what I need. We don't even need to go to Him over and over and over and over and over and over again, telling Him, this is what I need, this is what I need, this is what I need. God knows. Now, we can go to Him more than once on things that we think we need, but we need to understand just by repeating it over and over doesn't mean that God's going to say yes. We need to focus on the fact that we have a relationship with the God of all creation. That's the part we need to focus on. Not what we're asking for, but who I'm talking to. That should be the focus. If we'll focus more on that we're talking to God, then the request will know, well, God knows what's best. We can ask, but then we'll wait. And then suggestion number 2 is, it's all about submission. Paul had a thorn in the flesh, 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 7 through 10. And he asked God to take it away more than once. And God said no. And you know what he finally wound up saying? He, that is Paul, I can live with that. I can live with that. Submit to His will. Submission leads to reliance. Reliance leads to a deeper faith. Deeper faith leads to more action. More action leads to endurance. Endurance leads to life. Why do we keep on praying? Even when God doesn't seemingly answer. Well, maybe God is giving us time to grow. Or maybe, just maybe, God is preparing us to say, my answer is not the same as yours. Focus on God and submit to His will. Let us all be more persistent and patient in our prayer life. If you're here this evening, you've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, we beg you to do so. God has done it all for us. And He wants us. He wants to bless us. He wants to give us salvation. He wants to give us the forgiveness of sins. But